To another episode of Ron's Library and Ideas. This is Ron. Now, my goal on this channel has always been to give y'all information that'll give you a different perspective of the world and hopefully a better understanding of everything that goes on in it. I'm of the mindset that when you know what has happened in the past, you can have a better understanding of what's going on now and what will happen in the future. So today I'm going to be reading to you from The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. And my goal for this is to start going live more often so I can expand my audience. So, without further ado, this is the definition that he gives of what an economic hitman is. Economic hitmen, EHMs, are highly paid professionals who cheat countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. They funnel money from the World Bank, the U.S. Agency for International Development, that's USAID, and other foreign aid organizations into the coffers of huge corporations, in the pockets of a few wealthy families who control the planet's natural resources. Their tools include fraudulent financial reports, rigged elections, payoffs, extortion, sex, and murder. They play a game as old as empire, but one that is taking on new and terrifying dimensions during this time of globalization. I should know, I was an economic hitman. Now, we witness things going on all around the world, and I have an idea that most people don't understand what's happening because the news doesn't give us the truth. You have to go to alternative sources like myself or other people that you may find online who can give you a better understanding or a better perspective of what has happened. Now, I'm going to continue in this, and y'all let me know if this is something that you want to hear more of, and we'll get to it. Let me know what you think in the comments. So, this is the introduction. I'm haunted every day by what I did as an economic hitman. I'm haunted by the lies I told back then about the World Bank. I'm haunted by the ways in which that bank, its sister organizations, and I empowered U.S. corporations to spread their cancerous tentacles across the planet. I'm haunted by the payoffs to the leaders of poor countries, the blackmail, and the threats if they resisted. If they refused to accept loans that would enslave their countries in debt, the CIA's jackals would overthrow or assassinate them. All right, so later on, we're going to get to when he's talking about what happened in Iran. Now, if you've been paying attention in the news, you see Iran has just had some type of coup happen. Well, we may be involved in that. Uh, and that's interesting to know. We're still doing regime changes, but we've gotten smart about how we do them. We don't just go in there and do it physically by ourselves. We don't send in troops. We send in proxy players. So it continues. I wake up sometimes to a horrifying images of heads of state, friends of mine who died violent deaths because they refused to betray their people. Like Shakespeare's Lady Macbeth, I tried to scrub the blood from my hands, but the blood is merely a symptom. The treacherous cancer beneath the surface, which was revealed in the original Confessions of an Economic Hitman, has metastasized. It has spread from the economically developing countries to the United States and the rest of the world. It attacks the very foundation of democracy and the planet's life support systems. All the EHM, economic hitmen, and jackals tools, false economics, false promises, threats, bribes, extortion, debt, deception, coups, assassinations, unbridled military power are used around the world today, even more than during the era I exposed more than a decade ago. Although this cancer has spread widely and deeply, Most people still aren't aware of it. Yet all of us are impacted by the collapse it has caused. It has become the dominant system of economics, government, and society today. I think it's also important for us to understand that we aren't immune from the consequences of what these governments do in the background. Like a lot of people say from different countries, they like Americans, but they hate what our government does. And what our government does, we got to pay the consequences for that sometime. Somebody says, "Hi, Shabuzi. How are you?" What's up? You trying to say I look like the guy from that song, "Everybody Getting Tipsy"? I'll take it. Maybe I do look like him. Let's see. All right, so let's get to this is part one, 1963 through 1971. Miss Top Notch 1984 says hello. Hello, that must be my sister. You know what's funny? Well, never mind. I'm not. Never mind. Dirty business. When I graduated from business school in 1968, I was determined not to participate in the Vietnam War. I had recently married Anne. She too opposed the war and was adventurous enough to agree to join the Peace Corps with me. We first arrived in Quito, Ecuador in 1968. I was a 23-year-old volunteer assigned to develop credit and savings cooperatives in communities deep in the Amazon rainforest. Anne's job was to teach hygiene and childcare to indigenous women. Now, isn't that interesting? People who have been having children from the dawn of time, we come in and say, hey, we're going to teach you how to take care of these children that you've been taking care of. That's a different type of arrogance. Anne had been to Europe, but it was my first trip away from North America. I knew we flew in Quito, one of the highest capitals in the world, and one of the poorest. I expected it to be different from anything I had ever seen, but I was totally unprepared for the reality. As our plane from Miami descended toward the airport, I was shocked by the hovels along the runway. I leaned across Anne in the middle seat and pointed through my window, asked the Ecuadorian businessman in the aisle next to me, do people actually live there? We are a poor country, he replied, nodding solemnly. The scenes that greeted us on the bus ride into town were even worse. Tattered beggars hobbling on homemade crutches along garbage infested streets. Children with horribly distended bellies. I think that's pronounced distended bellies. Skeletal dogs and shanty towns of cardboard boxes that passed as homes. The bus delivered us to Quito's five-star hotel, the Intercontinental. It was an island of luxury in that sea of poverty, and a place where I and about 30 other Peace Corps volunteers would attend several days of in-country briefings. During the first of many lectures, we were informed that Ecuador was a combination of feudal Europe and the American Wild West. Our teachers prepped us all about the dangers: venomous snakes, malaria, anacondas, killer parasites, and hostile head hunting warriors. Then the good news. Texaco had discovered vast oil deposits not far from where we'd been stationed in the rainforest. We were assured that oil would transform Ecuador from one of the poorest countries in the hemisphere to one of the richest. One afternoon, while waiting for a hotel elevator, I struck up a conversation with a tall blonde man who had a Texas drawl. He was a seismologist, a Texaco consultant. When he learned that Anne and I were Peace Corps volunteers who'd be working in the rainforest, he invited us to dinner in the elegant restaurant on the top floor of the hotel. I couldn't believe my good fortune. I seen the menu and knew that our meal would cost more than our monthly living allowance. That night, As I looked through the restaurant's windows out at Pinchinacha, the mammoth volcano that hovers over Ecuador's capital, and sipped the margarita. Somebody's going to go look up the capital of Ecuador and see that I probably pronounced that wrong, but that's okay. I became infatuated with this man and the life he lived. He told us that sometimes he flew in a corporate jet directly from Houston to an airstrip hacked out of the jungle. We don't have to endure immigration or customs, he bragged. The Ecuadorian government gives us special permission. His rainforest experience included air conditioned trailers and champagne and filet mignon dinners served on fine china. Not quite what you'll be getting, I assume, he said with a laugh. He then talked about the report he was writing that described a vast sea of oil beneath the jungle. This report, he said, will be used to justify huge World Bank loans to the country and to persuade Wall Street to invest in Texaco and other businesses that would benefit from the oil boom. When I expressed amazement that progress could happen so rapidly, he gave me an odd look. What did they teach you in business school anyway? He asked. I didn't know how to respond. Look, he said, it's an old game. I've seen it in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Now here. Seismology reports combined with one good oil well, a gusher like the one we just hit, he smiled, Boomtown, and mentioned all the excitement around how oil will bring prosperity to the Ecuadorians. Only those smart enough to play the game, he said. I'd grown up in a New Hampshire town named after a man who built a mansion on a hill overlooking everyone else, using the fortune he'd amassed by selling shovels and blankets to the California gold miners in 1849. The merchants, I said, the businessmen and bankers. You bet. And today, the big corporations. He tilted back in his chair. We own this country. We get a lot more than permission to land planes without custom formalities. Formality, excuse me. Like what? Oh my God, you do have a lot to learn, don't you? He raised his martini toward the city. To begin with, we control the military. We pay their salaries and buy them their equipment. They protect us from the Indians who don't want oil rigs on their lands. In Latin America, he who controls the army controls the president and the courts. We get to write the laws, set fines for oil spills, labor rates, all the laws that matter to us. Texaco pays for all that, Anne asked. Well, not exactly. He reached across the table and patted her arm. You do, or Daddy does. The American taxpayer. The money flows through U.S. aid, the World Bank, CIA, and the Pentagon. But everyone here, he swept his arm toward the window in the city below, knows it's all about Texaco. Remember, countries like this have long histories of coups. If you take a good look, you'll see that most of them happen when the leaders of the country don't play our game. Now, a coup is when there's a form of government that's overthrown. That's what they were accusing Donald Trump of doing when he had his January 6th or whatever. After the election, all those people came up to the Capitol. They were saying, oh, he's trying to have a coup. Are you saying Texaco overthrows governments? I asked. He laughed. Let's just say that governments don't cooperate. Let's just say that governments that don't cooperate are seen as Soviet puppets. They threaten American interests and democracy. The CIA doesn't like that. That night was the beginning of my education in what I've come to think of as the EHM system. Remember, that's economic hitman. Ann and I spent the next month stationed in the Amazon rainforest. Then we were transferred to the high Andes, where I was assigned to help a group of campesino brickmakers and train handicapped people for jobs in local businesses. I was told that the brickmakers needed to improve the efficiency of their archaic ovens in which their bricks were baked. However, one after another, they came to me complaining about the men who owned the trucks and the warehouses down in the city. Ecuador was a country with little social mobility. A few wealthy families, the Ricos, ran just about everything, including local businesses and politics. Their agents bought bricks from the brickmakers at extremely low prices and sold them at roughly 10 times that amount. One brickmaker went to the city mayor and complained. Several days later, he was struck by a truck and killed. Terror swept the community. People assured me that he'd been murdered. My suspicion that it was true was reinforced when the police chief announced that the dead man was part of a Cuban plot to turn Ecuador communist. Che Guevara had been executed by a CIA operation in Bolivia less than 3 years earlier. He insinuated that any brickmaker who caused trouble would be arrested as an insurgent. The brickmakers begged me to go to the Ricos and set things right. They were willing to do anything to appease those they feared, including convincing themselves that if they gave in, the Ricos would protect them. I didn't know what to do. I had no leverage with the mayor and figured that the intervention of a 25-year-old foreigner would only make matters worse. I merely listened and sympathized. Eventually, I realized that the Ricos were part of a strategy, a system that has subjugated Andean peoples through fear since the Spanish conquest. I saw that by commiserating, I was enabling the community to do nothing. They needed to learn to face their fears. They needed to admit to the anger they had suppressed. They needed to take offense at the injustices they had suffered. They needed to stop looking to me to set things right. They needed to stand up to the Ricos. Late one afternoon, I spoke to the community. I told them that they had to take action. They had to do whatever it would take, including taking the risk of being killed so that their children could prosper and live in peace. My realization about enabling that community was a great lesson for me. I understood that the people themselves were collaborators in this conspiracy and that convincing them to take action offered the only solution, and it worked. The brickmakers formed a co-op. Each family donated bricks, and the co-op used the income from those bricks to rent a truck and warehouse in the city. The Ricos boycotted the co-op until a Lutheran mission from Norway contracted with the co-op for all the bricks for a school it was building at about 5 times the amount the Ricos had paid the brickmakers, but half the price the Ricos were charging the Lutherans. A win-win situation for everyone except the Ricos. The co-op flourished after that. Less than a year later, Ann and I completed our Peace Corps assignment. I was 26 and no longer subject to the draft. I became an EHM. When I first entered those ranks, I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. South Vietnam had fallen to the communist north, and now the world was threatened by the Soviet Union and China. My business school professors had taught that financing infrastructure projects through mountains of World Bank debt will pull economically developing nations out of poverty and save them from the clutches of communism. Experts at the World Bank and US aid reinforced this mindset. By the time I discovered the falsehood of that story, I felt trapped by the system. I had grown up feeling poor in my New Hampshire boarding school, but suddenly I was making a great deal of money, traveling first class to countries I had dreamed about all my life, staying in the best hotels, eating in the finest restaurants, and meeting with heads of state. I had it made. How could I even consider getting out? Then the nightmares began. I woke in dark hotel rooms sweating, haunted by images of sights I had actually seen. legless lepers strapped into wooden boxes on wheels, rolling along the streets of Jakarta. Men and women bathing in slime green canals while next to them others defecated. A human cadaver abandoned on the garbage heap, swarming with maggots and flies, and children who slept in cardboard boxes, vying with roaming packs of dogs for scraps of rubbish. I realized that I had distanced myself emotionally from these things. Like other Americans, I seen these people as less than human. They were beggars, misfits, them. One day, my Indonesian government limo stopped at a traffic light. A leopard thrust the gory remnants of a hand through my window. My driver yelled at him. The leopard grinned, a lopsided, toothless smile, and withdrew. We drove on, but his spirit remained with me. It was as though he had sought me out. His bloody stump was a warning, his smile a message. Reform, he seemed to say. Repent. I began to look more closely at the world around me and at myself. I came to understand that although I had all the trappings of success, I was miserable. I've been popping Valium every night and drinking lots of alcohol. I get up in the mornings, force coffee and pet pills into my system, and stagger off to negotiate contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That life had come to seem normal to me. I had bought into the stories. I was taking on debt to support my lifestyle. I was operating out of fear. The fear of communism, losing my job, failure, and not having the material things everyone told me I needed. One night I woke up with the memory of a different type of dream. I had walked into the office of a leader in the country that had just discovered it had lots of oil. Our construction companies, I told him, will rent equipment from your brother's John Deere franchise. We'll pay twice the going rate. Your brother can share his profits with you. In the dream, I went on to explain that we'd make similar deals with friends of his who own Coca-Cola bottling plants, other food and beverage suppliers, and labor contractors. All he had to do was sign off on a World Bank loan that will hire U.S. corporations to build infrastructure projects in his country. Then I casually mentioned that a refusal will bring in the jackals. Remember, I said, what happened too. I rattled off a list of names like Mossadegh of Iran, Arbenz of Guatemala, Allende of Chile, Lumumba of the Congo, Diem of Vietnam. All of them, I said, were overthrown, or I ran a finger across my throat because they didn't play our game. I lay there in bed once again in a cold sweat, realizing that this dream described my reality. I had done all of that. It had been easy for me to provide government officials like the one in my dream with impressive materials that they could use to justify the loans to their people. My staff of economists, financial experts, statisticians, and mathematicians was skilled at developing sophisticated economic models that proved that such investments in electrical power systems, highways, ports, airports, and industrial parks would spur economic growth. For years, I also had relied on those models to convince myself that my actions were beneficial. I had justified my job by the fact that gross domestic product did increase after the infrastructure was built. Now I came face to face with the facts of the story behind the mathematics. The statistics were highly biased. They were skewed to the fortunes of the families that owned the industries, banks, shopping malls, supermarkets, hotels, and a variety of other businesses that prospered from the infrastructure we built. They prospered. Everyone else suffered. Money that had been budgeted for healthcare, education, and other social services was diverted to pay interest on the loans. In the end, the principal was never paid down. The country was shackled by debt. Then, International Monetary Fund, IMF, hitmen arrived and demanded that the government offer its oil or other resources to our corporations at cut rate prices, and that the country privatize its electric, water, sewer, and other public sector institutions and sell them to the corporocracy. Big business was the winner. In every case, a key condition of such loans was that the projects will be built by our engineering and construction companies. Most of the money never left the United States. It simply was transferred from banking offices in Washington to engineering offices in New York, Houston, or San Francisco. We EHMs also made sure that the recipient country agreed to buy airplanes, medicines, tractors, computer technologies, and other goods and services from our corporations. Despite the fact that the money was returned almost immediately to the corporate members of the corporocracy, the recipient country, the debtor, was required to pay it all back, principal plus interest. If an EHM was completely successful, the loans were so large that the debtor was forced to default on its payments after a few years. When this happened, we EHMs, like the mafia, demanded our pound of flesh. This often included one or more of the following: control over United Nations votes, the installation of military bases, or access to precious resources such as oil. Of course, the debtor still owed us the money, and another country was added to our global empire. Those nightmares helped me to see that my life was not like the life I wanted. I began to realize that, like the Andean brickmakers, I had to take responsibility for my life, for what I was doing to myself and to those people in their countries. But before I could grasp the deeper significance of this understanding that had begun to stir within me, I had to answer a crucial question. How did a nice kid from rural New Hampshire ever get into such a dirty business? And that brings us to the end of chapter 1. Oftentimes you hear me say on this channel that this is a game that's being played. And it is. It's the game of empire. How do I expand my empire and my control over the world? You know, it used to be simple to where you just had to send your men in to kill a bunch of people and you take over a country. But now that we can actually see these images in real time of what's happening to people, you know, the empire makers, the ones trying to expand their empire, they had to get smart. They had to do it in a subversive way. So in comes big business. Let me trick you into taking out a very huge loan. And then when you can't pay it back, well, now you owe me a favor. Now you owe me quite a few favors. That's big business. That big business feeds into capitalism. And this type of stuff still goes on today. But the good news, the wonderful news is this isn't a system that is sustainable because you're not looking out for the betterment of the people. They have to do so much in order to keep their empire afloat. And it's starting to crumble around them. You see the hints of it going around, the desperation. There's things at play that we aren't aware of. But these people who quote unquote have all this power, all this influence, you know, the actions that they're doing show me that they're afraid of the people. They're afraid of you. And they fear you because you have more power than what you realize. We can think these people out of existence. As a practice, as a tool. Before you go to sleep at night, I want you to imagine a world where they don't exist. Imagine a world where you don't have people who are so money hungry and power hungry that they're willing to kill billions of people. Imagine a world without them and imagine how you would feel in that world. Just by you thinking about that and going to sleep and putting that vibration out, that causes changes in this reality. Just by you thinking about it. One of the things that they do, they show you so much doom and gloom through social media, through television, through the news, through movies. They like to show you that, it's a helpless thing trying to fight against the empire. They want to get that ingrained in your head. But they do that to try to convince you that you don't have power, but you do have power. Like I said, we can think them out of existence. Imagine the world that you want to see. Imagine how you would feel in that world and watch how those things start to happen. You don't even have to understand how it happens, but you'll start to see things are starting to collapse. It's good to know what's going on in the world. It's good to understand the games that are played, but don't let it get you emotionally down. Or don't dwell in those emotions, because when you first learn about it, it is enough to make you angry. It's enough to really piss you off. But your goal is not to sit in that emotion, but to transmute that into something greater. My part that I feel like I'm doing is spreading information, sharing the things that I've learned. As you start to change your mind, as you start to learn more, your reality will change as well. So that's all we're going to talk about tonight. Again, let me know what you thought about this. If you missed the first part, you can catch the replay. I was reading out of Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. Excellent book where this author tells you about the games that he played to help topple countries to bring them into this American empire so we can have more power and influence around the world. All completely legal for the most part, but done in some very evil, low-handed ways. Yes, I agree. This is a great book. Put me on to a lot of game. So hopefully you guys will enjoy my reading this, and it'll spark something inside of you. So, or you see things happen on the news, you won't necessarily fall for the story that they're giving you. Because again, they're always going to try to make it seem like we're the good guys and we're doing the right thing. That's not necessarily the case. Thomas Sowell said something that stuck out to me. He said, I don't want to quote him because I don't know the exact saying he said, but basically, what the interests of these government institutions are and the interests of the people, they don't always coincide. They do what they want to do to further their interests. If you happen to benefit from that, good. But if you don't, just don't sweat off their back. Thank you. Yes, it is very true. But look, like I said, I don't know if you heard me earlier. We can think these people out of existence. That's why they don't want us focusing on the power that we have within ourselves. When you go to sleep tonight, again, think about the type of world you want to live in without the people who are causing so much struggle and strife. If you do that, you dwell on that, how that will make you feel, and that puts out an energy into the universe, into this reality that causes change. That's the power that you have. Spread the word. We can think these people out of existence. And thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you hit the like button. Share this with somebody. And I'll see y'all on the, okay, wait a second. That's right. They don't want us to know our power. And you're powerful beyond measure. All right, y'all. I'll holler at y'all next time. Peace.